Have you thought about buying a 360 camera, but not too sure if you should really buy one or which one should you buy? In this video, we are going to have a look at this brand new Kandao QooCam 3. It is the latest 360 camera from Kandao. If you haven't heard of Kandao before, they made many 360 and 3D cameras. I reviewed their little cute QooCam EGO a little while ago, but they also made some really serious camera like the Obsidian Pro, which is a professional 360 camera that costs more than my car and uses 8 APS-C camera to capture events like NASA space rocket launch in 360. So this QooCam 3 is not really a Obsidian Pro, but the price is also much more affordable. The launch price of this QooCam 3 is only US $349, which make it one of the cheapest 360 camera in the market, quite a bit cheaper than the very popular Insta360 X3. By the way, I just happened to be in Shenzhen, China recently, which is where Kandao's headquarters is, so I went to their headquarters and sat down with their product team to learn more about this camera. But while Kandao has provided me a sample of the QooCam 3 for this review, and they also kindly bought me a coffee when I visit their headquarters, they did not pay me any money, and my trip to Shenzhen was also not funded by them. If you're interested to see what their headquarters looks like, I do have a bit of behind the scene footage that I captured when I visit their headquarters, and I will share them with you at the end of this review. So in this video, I will share with you all my test results, thoughts, as well as all the things that I learned from the team during my visit to the headquarters. And I'm also going to do a lot of comparisons with the Insta360 X3. The X3 is probably the best-selling 360 camera in the market right now. I myself have bought one as well. But not just that, I'm also going to do a bit of comparison with the Insta360 One RS 1-inch 360 edition, which I'm going to just call it Insta360 1-inch in the rest of this review. That's the 360 camera that has the 1-inch sensor and the Leica branded optics. In terms of price, the Insta360 1-inch is much more expensive than the Kandao QooCam 3, and it has a larger 1-inch sensor, so it doesn't sound really like I should compare it with the QooCam 3. But watch this review and you will know why I want to compare these two cameras. One of the first things I noticed is that this QooCam 3 doesn't have the typical 360 camera design where the front and rear camera are on the same axis. Instead, the two cameras are offsetted. It's quite different to cameras like the Insta360 X3 or the Ricoh Cheetah or even Kandao's own QooCam 8K. The design of the QooCam 3 is more similar to the GoPro Max that has a square-shaped body. When I was at Kandao's headquarters, one of the first things I asked their product team is, why a design like this? They explained to me that it's because QooCam 3 uses two large 1/1.55-inch sensor with fast f1.6 aperture lenses. By the way, Kandao told me the camera sensor is manufactured with 2 micrometer process. So while they could put the cameras on the same axis opposite to each other, they have to use a periscopic lens design to make the camera not too thick. The downside of the periscopic lens design is it would affect the image quality, and Kandao's engineering team want to avoid that. So instead, they move one of the camera to the side, and it means there's more space for each of the sensor to use the more traditional optics design, which should give us better image quality. The trade-off is that the camera is now a bit wider. It is slightly harder to hold with one hand or put it into the pocket. We also have 2 separate lens caps instead of just one. But the biggest potential issue is that it may impact the stitching of image from the front and rear cameras, which means how the objects will look in the 360 video or photo if the subject is positioned right at the edge of the camera. We will see if that's really the case a little bit later on in this review. Now on the positive side, apart from allowing Kandao to create better optics, the wider camera body allows Kandao to install the LCD screen horizontally. The LCD screen on the Kandao 3 is not really a big one, it's actually slightly smaller than the one on the Insta360 X3, but having it in the horizontal orientation make it a lot more user-friendly in my opinion. We can see the image in landscape format instead of portrait so that we can see wider image. The user menu is easier to use as well with a wide screen. However, the screen on the Kandao 3, color and contrast are quite average. The screen is a bit hard to use when under very bright sunlight. Now, while the quality of the screen is not the best, the build quality of the QooCam 3 itself is very good. The camera feels very solid. There's a rubberish finish on the outside, which makes the camera not slippery at all. The QooCam 3 is a waterproof and dustproof camera. It has IP68 rating, and Kandao say the camera can be used as deep as 10 meters or 33 feet underwater. I haven't tried put the camera so deep into the water, but normal underwater activity like swimming or just dipping into a bit of water is definitely not a problem at all. To access the microSD card, you just need to open the battery door on the side. I do find using my normal size finger is a little bit hard to grab the microSD card from the camera, but if your fingers are smaller than mine, then it should be much easier. While removing the micro SD card from the QooCam 3 is not as easy as I want, partially due to the size of my fingers, I still think it is better than the Insta360 X3, as with the X3, it requires you to remove the battery first before you can reach the micro SD card. But the worst experience I had must be the Insta360 1-inch, because that camera has a modular design. I basically have to take that camera apart to get to the micro SD card. Firstly, I need to remove the top camera module of the Insta360 1-inch, then remove the outer shell from the body, then remove the bottom module, and then finally I can access the micro SD card slot. It is not something I want to do when I'm out shooting in the field, as I could easily just drop part of the camera when doing that. So in comparison, the QooCam 3 is still the best in terms of accessing the micro SD card. Oh, another thing I want to mention is, when you want to remove the battery, you may find the battery door would detach from the camera at the same time. But don't panic, this is normal. What you need to do is just push half of the door forward, then position the door in an angle, and then you can clip the battery door back onto the camera. It takes a bit of practice at the beginning, but once you figure out how to do that, it's not that bad. Behind the battery door, you can also find the USB-C port as well. The camera doesn't come with a charger, but you can charge the battery by using a USB-C cable directly and connect it to a suitable power source. You can even power the camera by USB-C only. What I mean is, even if you don't have any battery installed onto the camera, you can still power it on by using a USB-C cable connected to a suitable power source, which would be quite handy if you want to set up the camera in a studio or other permanent position. The weight of the QooCam 3 is 201 grams, so it is about 20 grams heavier than the Insta360 X3, but almost 40 grams lighter than the Insta360 1-inch. When I hold it, especially with a selfie stick, the weight of the QooCam 3 definitely feels more similar to the X3 than the 1-inch. There is a tripod mount at the bottom of the camera, so you can attach it to a selfie stick or any other mounting options, no matter it's the one that is officially from Kandao or any other generic accessories that is designed for action cameras or other 360 cameras in the market. There are only two physical buttons on the QooCam 3. One is for power on the unit, but can also be used to switch between photo and video mode, and one is the shutter button. In my QooCam EGO review, I complained the EGO's shutter button was very hard to press, so every time I press it, it would cause quite a bit of camera shake. Fortunately, it is much better and not really an issue at all with this QooCam 3 this time. So apart from these two physical buttons, everything else is controlled by the touch interface, or there are two touch buttons next to the screen. One of those is customizable as well. The touch screen control is very responsive. The menu system is the typical 360 camera design, so if you have used a previous Kandao or Insta360 camera, you will know how to control the camera straight away. And as mentioned before, I found the wide landscape orientation screen makes the menu system a lot easier to use compared to the typical portrait orientation on most other 360 cameras. With my current pre-production firmware, I cannot use the touch screen to change the camera angle, but Kandao said they are working on that right now. Even after using so many 360 cameras, one thing I'm still amazed is how the camera can stitch the image from the front and the rear camera together to create an almost seamless 360-degree video or photo. However, since the QooCam 3 has an offset camera design, so I'm a bit worried if the stitching would be not quite as good. So I did a few tests and let's have a look at the results. I hold the QooCam 3 using the Kandao selfie stick and have the side of the camera pointing towards me, which means I'm right between the edge of the front and rear camera and therefore can really test if the stitching result is good or not. This is the result I got after rendering the video using the QooCam Studio. There is some obvious stitching artifact. My face got squashed and I look a bit like an alien. But this is when I rendered the video without enabling the optical flow setting. If we compare it with the video from the Insta360 X3, also without optical flow, the result from the X3 is also not good, but slightly better than the QooCam 3. Now, if we enable optical flow, the video from both cameras are much better now. I would say the result from the X3 is still slightly better, but the QooCam 3 is not bad. There's only some pretty minor artifact. So even though I'm standing at the worst possible angle and also quite close to the camera, I feel the result is still acceptable. So it seems the offset camera design of the QooCam 3 does affect the stitching, but fortunately the impact, especially with the optical flow enabled, is very minor. However, one thing I want to mention is, turn on the optical flow does significantly slow down the speed of rendering the video. Using my 16-inch 2021 MacBook Pro M1 Max running a non-final version of QooCam Studio to render 2 minutes of 5.7K 30 video in V-frame format with stabilization set to horizontal steady. If I don't turn on the optical flow option, it takes about 1 minute 30 seconds to export the video to 4K H.265 format, which is not bad. However, the same video but with the optical flow enabled, it takes almost exactly 7 minutes. That is more than 4 times slower. In comparison, the desktop software for the Insta360 cameras seems to be more optimized. If I export a similar length video with optical flow enabled and other similar output settings, it only takes 2 minutes 35 seconds to render the output. I will go a little bit deeper about the software later on in this review. When shooting video, the QooCam 3 has the electronic image stabilization system that uses information from the gyro to keep the video footage steady. And it works very well. No matter I was walking, running, or riding a e-scooter on a pretty bumpy road, the footage is still very steady. When I compare it to the Insta360 X3, the stabilized footage from both cameras are very smooth. There really isn't any noticeable difference between the output from these two cameras. Well, at least when these cameras were used during the daytime. When these cameras were used at night, there is some pretty noticeable difference, and I will show you that in the next section. Oh, one more thing, the electronic image stabilization is only for the video mode, so if you take photo, there is no stabilization at all, but this is the same for pretty much any 360 camera or action camera, or actually any camera in general. The QooCam 3 can capture video up to 5.7K resolution at 30 frames per second or 4K at either 30 or 60 frames per second. There isn't any high-speed recording option like 100 or 120 frames per second available. I've asked Kandao whether they can or will add faster frame rate, and they told me they will consider that. When recording video, the recorded files are saved in 5 minutes long chunks. Each chunk is 2 files, each represent the video captured by each of the camera, and they are just over 2.2 GB per file. And there's also a proxy video file that contains the low resolution version of video from both cameras. Data rate is about 120 megabit per second, which is the same as the Insta360 X3 or the 1-inch. There are auto and manual exposure control available. In manual exposure mode, you can adjust shutter speed, ISO, white balance, and if you shoot in auto exposure mode, you can adjust the exposure compensation instead. Now let's have a look at the image quality of the video captured by the QooCam 3, and I will compare it with the Insta360 X3 as well as the Insta360 1-inch. Okay, let's have a look at this set of sample video that I put the camera on a tripod, and it is a pretty static scene as I mainly want to look at the sharpness and also the dynamic range. I shot these video clips in my room during my trip to Shenzhen, and it was during the day, so my room was pretty bright. All these videos were shot one after another, but since I do need to switch the camera and set up the camera settings, there was still a short gap, about a few minutes between these videos were captured. I leave all the camera settings in auto, so auto exposure, auto white balance. During editing, I try to match the output camera settings, but since the cameras are different and I need to use different software, so the videos are not exactly identical. But anyway, look at these videos. Even side by side, I think the difference is not very dramatic. The biggest difference I would say is the auto white balance. In this set of example videos, the Insta360 1-inch is a bit cooler and also a little bit higher contrast, as you can see the highlight is clipped a little bit more than the other two cameras. Now, if we zoom in part of the video and compare it again, I can see the QooCam 3 is slightly sharper and has more fine details than the Insta360 X3, but the Insta360 1-inch is a bit sharper and cleaner than the QooCam 3. If you look at the highlight area, the QooCam 3 also appears to maintain highlight details slightly better than the X3. However, the X3 does have a video recording mode called Active HDR. If I enable that mode, it gives me some noticeable improvement in dynamic range, quite a bit more highlight details than the QooCam 3. On the downside, it seems this Active HDR mode makes the shadow area more noisy. But the shadow noise is still not bad, at least in this example. With this set of test video, I purposely put the QooCam 3 packaging box quite close to the camera. The reason is that all 360 cameras have fixed focus, so I want to see if the larger sensor and the faster lens on the QooCam 3 would make the close focus capability noticeably worse or not. But it seems the QooCam 3's close focus is still not bad, and you would rarely put anything closer to the camera than that anyway, as the 360 camera would really distort the image if a subject is too close to the camera. And now let's have a look at another test video shot in the same room, but this time the room was much darker. We can see some bigger difference now. If you have a look at the video from the QooCam 3 and compare it with the Insta360 X3, X3's image quality is now significantly worse than the QooCam 3. There appears to be some really strong noise reduction applied to the Insta360 X3, so the video from the X3 contains almost no small details. My backpack in the background becomes just one black object. If you look at my MacBook Pro's keyboard, you can't really see any keys. Even if you look at the logo on my shirt, you cannot read any letters. The strong noise reduction basically makes everything super soft on the X3 video and make it almost like a watercolor drawing. The QooCam 3 managed to maintain a lot more details. And if I do the video recording with the X3 using the HDR mode, the video image quality becomes even worse overall. While the highlight has slight improvement, the image is darker, there is a lot more noise in the shadow, and it doesn't give us any improvement in details at all. So if you have an Insta360 X3, I would really suggest avoid shooting in HDR mode when you're using it under dark condition. Now if we compare the video from the QooCam 3 with the Insta360 1-inch, the first thing I notice is the video from the QooCam 3 has a lot more noise. When I was at Kandau's headquarters, their product team did tell me that they choose to apply very minor noise reduction and processing to the output, as they would like to preserve as much details as possible. So it's not really surprising that the video from the QooCam 3 just has a lot more noise. But at the same time, if we zoom in and look at my backpack in the background, we can see the QooCam 3 managed to maintain a lot more details than the Insta360 1-inch. And the video is also way sharper than the Insta360 1-inch as well. I feel is really a personal preference and also depends on your workflow, which output is better. But personally, I prefer the QooCam 3's video more. I myself don't really mind a bit of extra noise as long as the noise are not those ugly chroma color noise, as I feel a bit of noise does give it a bit more organic look, and there are just so much more details in QooCam 3's video. And the thing is, I could always choose to apply some extra noise reduction myself during post-processing if I want to make it less noisy. But if some strong noise reduction was already applied to the video, I cannot revert that to recover more fine details. Now let's have a look at another set of comparison video. They were shot using the QooCam 3 and Insta360 X3 under low light, but this time the camera is moving, so this is closer to how we would usually capture video using a 360 camera. If you look at the Insta360 X3's video, it really shows why I don't really use that camera after dark. The video has just no details at all and everything is just soft, very soft because of the noise reduction. And when I start running, it also highlights another issue that I have with the X3 when used under low light. Because of the slower lens, the Insta360 X3 has to shoot at a slow shutter speed to get more light in, as it also cannot increase the ISO too much because of its small sensor size. Because of that, the video got quite a bit of motion blur. This is very noticeable and it also looks very weird after the image stabilization, as the electronic stabilization make the camera angle very steady, but our eyes still see the motion blur, and that is very unnatural and just very confusing to our brain. This is the reason why I usually just much prefer in-body sensor stabilization or optical image stabilization for video rather than electronic image stabilization. Electronic image stabilization works great when the shutter speed is high, but once the shutter speed drops below some certain speed, then the electronically stabilized video looks pretty horrible and unnatural. But anyway, the issue I mentioned still affects the QooCam 3, but it is way less obvious. I remember Kandal's product team told me that the QooCam 3 would use the gyro information to adjust the shutter speed so that if the camera is not moving, the shutter speed would be lower so it can shoot at a lower ISO. But when the gyro detects the camera is moving, the camera would increase the shutter speed so each of the video frame would look sharper and has less motion blur. So does the video from the QooCam 3 looks great when used under low light? No, it doesn't look great, but it is much better than the X3, which is not really usable in my opinion. It is also very comparable to the Insta360 1-inch. I would be quite happy to shoot video with the QooCam 3 under most low light condition. Alright, we just had a look at the video quality, and now let's check out the audio quality of this Kandao QooCam 3. Compared to the Kandao QooCam 8K, one upgrade that comes with this QooCam 3 is that the number of microphones building on the camera is upgraded from 2 to 4, and that allows the camera to capture audio from 360 degrees. With the pre-production firmware and software that I'm using right now, when I render the audio out, I could choose to either output the video as Panasonic format, which means the audio is output as 4 separate tracks, or I could choose to output the audio as stereo, which is what I'm going to do with this video. I'm currently also recording this video right now side by side with a Insta360 X3. Whoa, that's a really loud truck. With an Insta360 X3. So I'm going to switch over to the X3 and let you compare the audio difference capture between these two cameras. Okay, now I have switched over to the X3, so the audio you hear is captured using X3, and I'm also choosing the stereo output option. In terms of audio features, the X3, at least at this moment, definitely has more features than the QooCam 3. For example, it has the ring noise reduction, which the QooCam 3 right now doesn't have. So it would be great if Kandao can work on more audio improvements and make the QooCam 3 similar to what the X3 can do, or even better in the near future. So what do you guys think about the audio captured by these two cameras? Which one you think sounds better? Drop a comment below and let me know. Now let's have a look at the photo quality. The QooCam 3 can capture 62 megapixel photos, and the photo can be saved in both JPEG and DNG RAW file format. This is slightly lower resolution than the Insta360 X3, which can capture 72 megapixel photo, but interestingly, the Insta360 1-inch can only capture 21 megapixel photo, so I guess sometimes it's not the number that matters the most. I want to do some comparison between the QooCam 3 and X3, but turns out it's actually a little bit harder to do a fair comparison because of the different sensor size, different processing, metering, and most importantly, the lens with different aperture. At first, I tried to just shoot the comparison photos in full auto mode. Look at these two photos captured using auto exposure mode pretty much at the same time. The exposure is different. It's not a huge difference, but that's enough to make any accurate image quality comparison very hard. I tried to take a few more photos, but the exposures is always a little bit different. Then I decided to switch to full manual mode, and here are two photos that shot with the same shutter speed and also both at the same base ISO 100 and using the same white balance setting as well. The photo from the QooCam 3 is slightly brighter, mainly because it has a brighter, faster lens. So I shot a few more photos with the X3 but at different shutter speed. I found if I make X3's exposure slower by about 1/3 stop, then the exposure would be quite similar. Now if we compare these two DNG RAW photos, if we zoom in, the X3 captures a bit more details and the image is slightly sharper. The X3 also appears to have slightly better dynamic range as well. But on the other hand, I noticed some weird artifacts on the X3's photo. And even though the photo were captured at the base ISO 100, the X3's shadow area looks really quite noisy, while the shot from the QooCam 3 looks much cleaner and what I expect for a photo that is captured at the base ISO. But overall, I think I prefer the photo from the X3 slightly more, even though the difference is not that big. When we are shooting in real world, a lot of time we want to control the shutter speed, especially when shooting under low light condition, because we don't want the shutter speed to go too slow. And that means we would be shooting at 1/3 stop higher ISO with the X3 compared to the QooCam 3 to get the same exposure. So now let's compare the photos captured under low light. I shot these photos in manual mode again. I fixed the shutter speed at 1/30th second. If I'm holding the 360 camera on a long selfie stick, this is probably the slowest shutter speed I would go to avoid blur caused by camera shake. Both cameras white balance I set at 5500K. For the Insta360 X3, I set the ISO to ISO 3200 as that is required to get an acceptable exposure and is already the maximum ISO the X3 can go up to. With the QooCam 3, because of its faster, brighter lens, I only need to shoot at ISO 2500 and can already get similar brightness. Now if I compare these two photos, there is a huge difference between these two photos. The photo from the QooCam 3 is noisy, but overall still looks pretty okay. But the photo from the Insta360 X3 is just a lot worse. The amount of noise, especially the chroma noise, the color shift and the lack of details, the image quality is definitely worse than the QooCam 3 and the difference is pretty big. The QooCam 3 has something called DNG8 photo mode. The camera takes a burst of 8 raw DNG photos and merge them together in camera to create a high quality photo file. I tried the DNG8 mode. There are some pros and cons with this DNG8 photo mode as well. The good thing is, the photo definitely looks a bit cleaner, there is less noise. The DNG8 photo's dynamic range is also slightly better, especially the shadow area. However, the downside is that the output resolution is only 1/4 of the normal photo, just like X3's HDR mode. So it's only around 15.5 megapixel and it takes almost half a minute to capture, process and save the photo. I want to mention again, I was testing it using a pre-production firmware, so there's possible there may be some other future improvement with the final firmware. But at this stage, for myself, I think I will stick with the normal photo mode as the 62 megapixel photo looks pretty good already and the capture speed is just much faster. The battery for the QooCam 3 is a 1600 mAh 6.16 Wh lithium-ion battery. I did a battery live test, fully charged the battery and record video in 5.7K 30 format. I managed to record about 15.8 minutes of video before the camera stopped recording. An interesting thing is, usually the camera would just turn off when it ran out of power and stopped recording. But with this QooCam 3, the camera actually is still on when it stopped recording. It just, if you try to press the record button, the camera would refuse to record and tell you it's because the battery level is very low. I did a battery test in my room here when the room temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. The back of the camera was 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. After 58 minutes of recording, the temperature of the back of the camera became 37 degrees Celsius or 99 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is slightly warm but not really hot, and there was no sign of overheat or anything like that. I also used the QooCam 3 side by side with the Insta360 X3 and 1-inch quite a bit when I was in Shenzhen and Hong Kong during summer. I also didn't have any overheating issues with any of these cameras, but the QooCam 3 does not feel quite as warm as the other two cameras even after some long recording sessions. One interesting thing is, Kandao did suggest me to switch the auto stop recording temperature setting from standard to high, as they said setting it to high wouldn't damage the camera but allows the recording to last longer when used on a hot day. So I was going to just see how long the camera can last with the standard settings. Then I will switch to high. But in the end, I didn't have to do that at all, as I just never managed to get the camera to raise the temperature high enough even during the summer in China, which get to almost 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. When I'm using the QooCam side by side with the X3, I notice one thing is, by default the X3 really try to preserve battery no matter you are shooting or not. For example, the X3 would turn off its screen very quickly even when you are shooting video, but with the QooCam 3 it would be a few minutes before it would turn off the screen even if you are not shooting. So I would like to see some extra settings that would allow user to set the camera to turn off the screen and go to sleep mode much quicker for those users who prefer to get the battery to last as long as possible. One of the best things about 360 camera is you don't have to worry about the camera angle at all when you are filming. That's why I really like to use it to shoot video when traveling, as I don't have to focus so much on the camera angle, and I can enjoy the trip a lot more. But what it means is, you will need to edit the video or photo afterwards to set your camera angle, the view angle, etc. So the software for editing your 360 video and photo is very important. Kandao has created a QooCam app for both iOS and Android, and there's also a computer desktop software called QooCam Studio for both Mac and Windows. I myself have only used the Android app and the Mac desktop software, so I will only share my experience with these two versions of the software. The desktop QooCam Studio software has a pretty standard design and workflow. You just need to import your video or photos, then select your media and set your camera angle, and you can add keep on just like any normal video editing software. So everything is pretty straightforward and easy to use. However, I found, at least with the version that I was using, has very limited number of options and settings that you can choose. For example, I don't even find a way to sort the files that I've imported. I can only filter by the type of media, so there's no sorting or ranking or any type of file management. There's also no audio playback when editing the video in the QooCam Studio. So if you want to extract or find a small part of the clip from a very long video, you may want to use the audio to help you to look for some particular moments. Sorry, you cannot do that right now with the QooCam Studio. Also, every click on the timeline would result in the screen grayed out, and you have to wait for a second or two before you can do anything. And I'm already using a pretty powerful 2021 MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip, so it really shouldn't happen. And I've mentioned earlier, the rendering time also appears to be quite a bit slower when I compare it to the Insta360 software, especially with the optical flow enabled. However, I do not know what sort of processing each software does, so it may not be a very fair comparison. But to be honest, my impression of the QooCam Studio is really not the best. It does the job okay, and it is fairly stable, but it doesn't provide me the best user experience. In comparison, Kandao's Android app is a lot better. Despite I was testing it on my 4-year-old Huawei P30 Pro, the app is a lot more responsive. There's also audio playback and a few options that is not available on the desktop software. I definitely enjoy the QooCam Studio smart device app a lot more compared to their desktop software. So I hope Kandao can improve their desktop software to at least bring the experience to the same level. I have been using my Insta360 X3 quite a lot over the last year. If you have been watching the videos on my channel, you will have seen me using my X3 during my trip to the Lumix event in Japan or my family trip to Queenstown, and I also use it to capture some of my everyday moments and even some of the behind the scene videos for my YouTube channel. I really like using a compact 360 camera as it's just very easy for me to carry, and I love the idea of capturing everything first and edit it later. However, I would rarely use my X3 after sunset because I found X3's low light performance is really not good at all. And I warned quite a few people the same thing when they told me they want to buy the X3. Now, with this QooCam 3, during the day, the image quality is quite similar to the X3, which is not a bad thing at all. But when shooting under low light, there is a huge difference between the QooCam 3 and the X3. QooCam 3's low light image quality is just way better than the X3. It's much sharper, retained more details, better color, and when the camera is moving, the video captured by the QooCam 3 would have a lot less of that weird effect that the X3 would have that is caused by motion blur combined with electronic image stabilization. While I still won't call QooCam 3's low light image quality excellent, at least I feel it is very usable, very acceptable. I would be very happy to use the QooCam 3 to capture some nighttime 360 video or photo, unlike the X3 which almost never leave home after sunset. I think Kandao choosing a slightly larger sensor combined with the brighter lens is really a great decision, as together it hugely improved the camera's low light performance, but the camera is still not too heavy or expensive. In terms of features, I do feel the QooCam 3 is lacking a bit when compared to the competitors like the Insta360 X3. I'm talking about both the features available on the camera itself and also the features available in their editing software. Actually, to me, the biggest weakness of this Kandao QooCam 3 is its editing software, especially the desktop software, as is lacking the polish or performance and features that I want to see. Fortunately, these are things that Kandao can improve, and from my conversations with Kandao, they are already working on quite a few things that I want to see, so hopefully it will be much improved in the near future. But even with some of these complaints and limitations that I pointed out, I still think the Kandao QooCam 3 is the best consumer level 360 camera in the market right now. The price of the QooCam 3 is quite a bit cheaper than the X3, which makes it a no-brainer choice for me to pick the QooCam 3. But to be honest, even if the QooCam 3 is same price as the X3, I would still choose the QooCam 3 as I can use the QooCam 3 during daytime and nighttime instead of only able to use it during the day with the X3. Even if I compare it with the more expensive Insta360 1-inch, I think the QooCam 3 could be a much more cost-effective alternative. QooCam 3's image quality, no matter day or night, are very similar to the Insta360 1-inch. I think if you want a great value for money 360 camera, it is really hard to get anything better than the Kandao QooCam 3 right now.
有8个 SSD， 它就能够支持，因为 ProRes 它本身码率啊，跟 CD 每边区的那种码率都很大啊，所以你只有 SSD 才能够往里边去写这种数据。